particular system. KRA has for ages attempted to tax the informal businesses, but to little success. But now this system will be in a bid to push to ensure that they collect as much as possible in a very transparent and accountable way as much as possible. So after years of relying on large manufacturers, importers, and salaried Kenyans, the KRA has launched an aggressive campaign to fulfill President William Ruto's demand for more revenue to meet his ambitious pre-election pledges by going after the hustlers. The Ruto government last year tasked KRA to collect 4 trillion shillings from taxpayers against 3 trillion that was collected in the financial year 2022-2023. This has been the taxman launch, this has seen the taxman launch this particular system, electronic tax information management, invoice management system, not information, electronic tax invoice management system that seeks to have small-scale traders like the mama mboga, the border riders, and all persons that are within the informal sector. Informal sector, basically, they do not have, a monthly pay slip from the employer, but they're basically employing themselves. That seeks to also increase that particular revenue target. And so the move comes month after KRA disclosed its helplessness in collecting taxes from the informal economy, which comprises small traders, small shops, and other businesses that have long evaded the tax man's net. Any business that will file its taxes and seek refunds will have to use ATIM's receipt to indicate expenses for the refunds to be effected. For example, if any employer pays taxi money for his employees and needs to mark that as an expense, he would have to file that ATIM's record, which means the taxi driver has to provide the receipt, and the importer's KRA will have included this driver in the tax bracket. The same applies to eateries, hotels, and farmers too. And so this ATM system is not quite popular among people, as many do not know, how it works, or have not heard about it, or are still learning about it. And also the fact that it basically means more taxes will have to be paid from those particular brackets of Kenyans. So KRA news tightens on hustlers. 98% of SMEs constitute 98% of businesses in the country and have an annual job creation of about 30%. So it's quite a huge industry or sector, for lack of a better word. Also, top of the page on the Standard, why Kindiki now wants APs given back old roles. Why Kindiki wants APs given back old roles. This is on the national security sector. And Interior Cabinet Secretary has provided documents to indicate the rise in lawlessness and exposure of government property to thieves, and is the result of the merger between the General Police and the Administrative Police. It recommends the AP be given back their old duties, and that is a story that is on page 4. As a split police give APs old roles to rein in insecurity. Now, about 101,421 police officers as of December 2021 are within the Kenya Police Service. 24,413 are on the Administration Police Service, and 5,003 officers are in the Directorate of Criminal Investigation. So you can see a majority of the police force are within the Kenya Police Service. Then the Administration Police Service has 24,000, and a paltry 5,000 are within the DCI. Now, the crime rate in the country as of 2021, we recorded 81,272 crime cases. This is basically double what the number of AP police officers are in the country as of 2021, and that was according to the Economic Survey of 2023. So we've got a huge rise in crime cases, and yet we have very less police officers, and so, or at least administrative police officers. And so Kindiki says, let's revert back to the old system and have APs, directly deal with these criminal cases. So that is the headline on the Standard, even as it speaks of inside Kalonzo's Mount Kenya charm offensive. We'll be dwelling a little bit more about that on the newspapers that speaks of inside, or the conversation that speaks on inside Kalonzo's Mount Kenya charm offensive. So that is on page 10. Kalonzo Musyoka is on his own path to make his own story. So will he be successful? That's the bigger question. Now, to the Daily Nation, murders that shook Kibaki's presidency. Murders that shook Kibaki's presidency, extrajudicial killings. The duo had been warned against abetting the activities of Mungiki sect. Which duo? That includes Oscar Kamau and George Paul, who are members of the Oscar Foundation, which is was an activist or an activism organization. Now, it is 15 years since that 10th Thursday on March 5th, 2009, when human rights activists Oscar Kingara and Paul Oulu were executed mafia style around 6 p.m. on Nairobi's State House Road. The killings, apart from drawing international condemnation, would split the grand coalition government of President Mwai Kibaki and Prime Minister Raila Odinga down the middle. But many questions still remain unanswered. And that's the story that is on page 6, 7, and 8 of the Daily Nation this morning, which speaks on the State House Road, a double murder that shook up the presidency. Two activists, 39-year-old Oscar Kingara Kamau and a 26-year-old George Paul, who were ambushed by gunmen in rush hour traffic along State House Road and were executed mafia style. Now, according to Duncan Haemba, who has filed this report, he says March 2009 was a 10th Thursday in Nairobi. Security forces seemed overwhelmed by protesting members of the outlawed Mungiki sect who had paralyzed activities in various parts of the city. And the protests were about the rise in extrajudicial killings by the police. The demonstrators had the backing of the Oscar Foundation, which had documented evidence of police excesses and also offered free legal aid to victims. Earlier that afternoon, the government spokesperson, Alfred Mutua, who was the government spokesperson then, like police headquarters, had warned that stern action would be taken against any organization abetting Mungiki activities. At dusk, two officials of the Oscar Foundation, Oscar Kamau Kingara and George Paul, were ambushed by gunmen in rush hour traffic along State House Road, and Oscar and his communications and advocacy officer were shot dead at point blank range at around 6:30 p.m. into the night. One of the students, Godwin Ogato, was shot by police. He was pronounced dead on arrival at the Kenyatta National Hospital. 15 years later, persons of interest regarding the executions that split the Grand Coalition government after Mwai Kibaki and Prime Minister Raila Odinga's faction took opposing positions on the killings that drew international condemnation. So that is a headline on the Daily Nation: murders that shook Kibaki's presidency, the extrajudicial killings. And on top of the page, interestingly, you can see a number of activists, including the now Senator Okia Omtata, who was among persons that marched during the burial of Oscar Kamau at his father's home in Kiambu County on March 14th, 2009. So that is the headline that is on the Nation, with questions on who were the hitmen who had trailed the two human rights activists and shot them dead, on whose behest were they acting, what was the motive for the mafia-style murders, and why has the government failed to investigate, apprehend, and prosecute those behind the killings to date. Also, housing levy set for return as Ruto assents to bill today. The Affordable Housing Bill of 2023 will be assented by President William Ruto at State House in Nairobi into law. And so 1.5% of employers' gross salary will be deducted, and the employees 1.5% will also match the employers' 1.5% that will go into the affordable housing bill. So this is also part of the conversation that we'll be having as the National Assembly and the Senate passed this bill unanimously last week. So which way forward for the housing levy, and will people adapt to it eventually? Finally, the Star newspaper, Ndindi Nyoro copies Ruto in early 2027 race. Ndindi Nyoro copies Ruto in early 2027 race. New move could rattle the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua after the youthful MP was endorsed by Murang'a leaders, and that is a story that is on page 5. Now, we've been having a conversation around Ndindi Nyoro and what his plan is. Well, some say, there's really nothing to be worried about. Some say, perhaps he's the man to take over in 2027 or 2032. Now, Ndindi Nyoro's last 6 stops, let's look at his itinerary. In March 16th, he was in Bonchari, Kisii County. On March 15th, he was in Soi, Uasin Gishu County, as well as in Starehe in Nairobi County. On March 12th, he was in Kabete, Kiambu County. And on March 10th, he was in Keses, Uasin Gishu. March 3rd, he was in Bondo, Siaya County, while in March 2nd, he was in Kacheliba, West Pokot County. So battle for Ruto running mates, Ndindi Nyoro moves outside Central. It's in a clear script that appears to borrow heavily from Ruto's. Nyoro had made at least 20 political stops across the country in the last 3 months, triggering conjecture about his political intentions. The 38-year-old appears keen to expand his political turf beyond Mount Kenya in what may rattle Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, who is, as well, from the mountain. Now, Ndindi moves has come under scrutiny after being publicly endorsed by a group of UDA legislators as Ruto's running mate in 2027. So Ndindi Nyoro copies Ruto in early 2027 race. We've heard from leaders of Murang'a County as well who said, they also would want, somebody from Murang'a that would also rise up and take that key political position. And so is there something the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua should be worried about? It's a wait and see, even as he says, perhaps the politicking needs to stop and persons to focus on development. Also, Ruto launches projects before worship session, says work and pray. He was in Narok County, where he was hosted by the Narok County Governor Patrick Olentuntu. He was also accompanied by the Tourism CS Alfred Mutua and other crop of leaders. And in that particular gathering, he's also pointed out about the affordable housing bill. And so, he says he's very much ready to get this all started and draw it to higher levels. So those are the stories making headlines on the newspapers. The Standard, Ndindi Nyoro copies Ruto in early 2027 race, or that is the Star. The Daily Nation speaks of murders that shook Kibaki's presidency, while the Standard speaks of KRA news titans on hustlers. All right, allow us to take a quick breather, but when we come back, we'll be getting into the conversation of the day, basically what has been making headlines on current affairs currently at the, within the nation, that is to do with the affordable housing bill, which will, perhaps by the end of the day, we shall be calling it the Affordable Housing Act, as well as the budget 2024-2025. We'll be looking at some of the key numbers that have been printed out on the budget policy statement, which is basically a reflection of the budget that will guide this incoming financial year. So that conversation returns in a bit. My guests are already in studio, Lutalala Muhwana, as well as John Kinuthia. So stay with us. We'll be right back in just a bit.
You are watching EBN TV, transforming your world. Every Thursday from 8:30 p.m.
Listen, every man needs God. And every man needs to learn to humble himself before God.
Enjoy teachings from Pastor Chris Oyakilome.
Here's what the Lord is instructing you to do. Prepare yourself in the Word of God. Feed your faith Prepare yourself in the Word.
Build your faith and
Affordable Housing Act of 2024, and this was, a different way that would, have put this particular conversation on the table after the courts halted the affordable housing bill or the housing levy that was in January 2024. So here we are having this conversation, but now from a different point of view, where we are not going to avoid it one way or the other, whether from the formal settlement or from the informal settlement. And so I'd love to give you a bit of context just before I introduce my guest this morning. Now, the affordable housing bill, or what now we'll have as the act, will see persons contribute 1.5% of their gross salary from the formal sector employment. That is 1.5%. We'll also have, person will be eligible for only one single house unit. You'll not be able to, acquire two houses or three housing units or four, just one. We're also looking at a scenario where you are allowed to withdraw your savings after writing a 90-day written notice to the Affordable Housing Fund Board. And then now the Affordable Housing Fund Board itself will be the body that is solely responsible to regulate and to ensure that we have these affordable housing units. The president is looking to construct about 200,000 units in a year. That means about 600,000 people will be employed. So that is the context just around this affordable housing bill. And also, as the conversation goes, I'll be giving you details of what had been proposed by the opposition, but that was also shot down within the Senate. So let me introduce my guest at this point. On my immediate right, I'm joined by Lutalala Mukhwana, who's a political analyst and commentator. Asante sana for coming in this morning. And next to him is John Kinuthia, who's a leadership and governance expert. Thank you for your company as well.
Most welcome.
Right, so Mukhwana, will just kick it off from your point of view. The Senate has passed this bill unanimously. 27 senators voted yes. And now we are basically now going to be talking about an act, as President William Ruto will be assenting it into law this morning. What do you think about that from where you sit?
Good morning, and first, before I start my commentary, let me correct you. I'm Talala Wycliffe.
All right.
Not Talala Mukhwana.
Yeah.
Now, as we all know, this affordable housing project was at the core of the president's manifesto. Mm-hmm. And we have seen several attempts of introducing it. And as we all know, the project has been stopped severally by the courts. And what the president has done is that he has picked out the issues that were highlighted by the courts, and instructed his party through the House leadership to come up with a bill to correct whatever the courts were saying that was illegal. So I think that is what has been done, and we are aware the bill went through the National Assembly and it was passed unanimously by a majority, and it moved to the Senate and it was equally passed. So as we speak today, we are now speaking of a bill that is now going to the president today for signing, and once it is signed, it becomes a law. So I think the issues that were raised by the courts have been sorted, and now we are now supposed to start talking about how it is going to be implemented. So from where I sit, I just wait to see the bill signed, because now it is we can no longer talk about whether it will or it will not. It is already passed. So what is important as Kenyans is now to digest the act once it is signed and know what is expected of us and how the project shall be run. That is now what is most important for now.
Right. Yeah. Just before we got to the Senate, or at least for that bill to even have that particular debate over at the National Assembly, majority of Kenyans, did not agree with, the consent of it and deducting 1.5% as well. Will this be a relief to them, or will they perhaps just get accustomed to it?
Of course, it cannot be a relief, because if they were against it because they felt it was a bit punitive or an added expense, it cannot change all of a sudden to be a relief. It will remain a burden, And now, because once a law is passed, there is only one option, that you have to acquaint with it and go by it. Because now all employers will be required to deduct that money, and they'll be required also to top up the 1.5. So it is not about now whether you like it or not. Once a law is passed, it becomes a law. Yeah.
Kinuthi, I'll come to you. 27 senators voted yes. 10 of them from Azimio la Umoja coalition, missed this particular sitting from the opposition, for that matter. With such an important and controversial bill that everyone, at least the senators know, all eyes would have been at the floor of that house. What does it say when leaders miss, attending this kind of important vote?
The first thing is it speaks to politicization of both the process and also the substance. There is positive politicization and there is negative politicization. The positive politicization is that, for example, the court had ruled on several factors that one made it, for example, inequitable. The courts had said, by differentiating between somebody who's earning a salary and somebody who's not, you're creating inequity there. So the court wanted disambiguation of those two things. The second one, there were multiple bases on which the court said, this is not ready. For example, the people who would voluntarily save into the scheme and then not get allocated a unit, right? They needed some sort of reprieve. So the positive politicization is that what the courts called the legal framework that was missing from this has now been worked into it, and majority of the amendments that the Senate made address that, because now there's a legal framework. For example, the court had ruled that what tied the Finance Act section 84, basically authorizing the Employment Act or modifying it so that these deductions could be made. The courts had ruled that was not a proper way to, execute taxation. They fixed that as well. There are multiple issues. For example, there's an issue about, the counties not being involved like they should, and with housing being a devolved part of government operations and services, they felt those had been left out. So those Senate amendments also amended that, and now there'll be a liaison with the counties in the execution of this act and the fund that will be created for it. Those are positive steps. Some of the negative politicization is when people take corners and polarize a process just based on the fact that their political views, or just the fact that they're political opposites, whether you're in opposition or in government. Kenyans really need and want and must have all politicians, irrespective of their affiliation, to support what is in the best interest of Kenya. And this speaks to a larger issue in Kenya, where a lot of our politics has just become so polarized, and we need to transition to that issue-based politics where merit and objectivity and facts do matter. So in my opinion, the more the negative politicization is toned down, and the positive politicization, which Parliament, that's their job. They are the legislative arm of the government. There's the executive, there's the judiciary, then there's the legislative. That is their job, to make laws. And if that can be, and I'll say, with all that said, a lot of good came out of the positive part of it, where they were doing their job. They created the legal framework. They detached from Section 84 of the Finance Act, and now when the act commences, there'll be no backdating, and everything will take effect after ascension. And now people who invest into the fund and don't get a housing unit will have 90 days, a reprieve basically, to write and have be able to withdraw their savings. So in a nutshell, I think the positive political process overwhelmed or carried the day, despite the the little drama that may have been there.
Right. Alushalala, now he's spoken of politicization of the process, and basically what we have, if you go to the general public, is that is a Kenya Kwanza bill. There are those who say, us in opposition, we do not, accept what, or we do not support that particular bill. Now, as you've said, it has already happened. So what we need to do is now get accustomed to this particular act. Yeah. How does the government now filter this message? Because we saw, they tried to explain to the people what the levy will be all about, but that failed. Now here we have the affordable housing bill. So how do they filter that message that gets to the public for them to understand, or to at least filter and let it not be such a political process, let it not be just the Kenya Kwanza bill that has passed? How do they filter that message?
Just like my friend here has said, this country, I think we have one serious problem of politicizing issues based on our political affiliations. And as you have said, we need to reach a point whereby objectivity and public good overrides everything. If something is good, or if something is for the good of the country, regardless of your political affiliations, it is important that you support it on the basis of the merit. What you have seen in the past is that we have seen very funny laws being passed just because of either being pushed through one political affiliation. For example, you remember the famous Security Amendment Bill in the former government. Despite the outcry that was there, it was pushed through. But later on, it came to haunt many of us. So what we are saying is that once a bill, if a bill is good, regardless of your political affiliation, it is important that you see beyond the political lenses. And now that this bill has been passed, and as you said, 10 members from Azimio. Yeah. You said they voted yes, or they missed the sitting.
They missed the sitting.
Now, there are two ways of voting. One way of voting is to vote yes. Another way of voting is to miss. Because when you miss, you have given the other guy who had a contrary opinion an edge over you. So what the Azimio senators, the 10 Azimio senators who missed the voting did, they actually helped the bill to sail through. They can't tell you that we didn't want the bill. If you don't want a bill, the logical thing is to go and vote no, so that your vote is counted. But once you miss, you've actually voted yes. Yeah. So now coming to the issue of how the government will disseminate the information, I think once a bill has been passed and it has become law, government has all the machinery from communication to government departments related to that particular function of disseminating the information. So for me, it is no longer a Kenya Kwanza thing. Of course, we know government of the day is Kenya Kwanza. Yeah. But once something has been passed, we have only one government. So it doesn't matter whether you are in opposition or in government, because at the end of the day, just like my friend has said, all the legal hurdles have been removed. We were asking ourselves, what if I contribute and I don't get a house? What happens? That has been sorted out. So it doesn't matter whether you are, and there is nowhere in the bill where it says that if you are from the opposition, you cannot get a house, because you will be able to contribute and will be able to get a house. If you don't get, there is already a provision of how you can recover your money. So it is no longer about whether you're in government or you are in opposition. Right. It is now a project, a Kenyan project, and everyone is eligible to serve and to get the house.
Right.
Yeah.
If you look at some of the proposals that the opposition had tried putting up, at least those that were present within the Senate, that were shot down, is that, for the deductions to be capped at 2,500 shillings, for the 1.5% deduction to be on net salary rather than gross salary, and also that persons that enter into a mortgage that is not contemplated under the Act, cannot or will not pay for this particular bill. these are valid proposals that had been made. So the question is, why would the government senators have shot these particular proposals down?
Well, firstly, I'd like to emphasize what my brother has said, especially with regards to the politicians playing their role. Even when you object to something so strongly, there's a technical, procedure where you can abstain from voting. So you can vote yes, you can vote no, or abstain. Sometimes you want to be counted as present, but you want to register your objection. So that it's good that members of parliament and the legislature as a whole, take their work seriously in that regard and, do their job. Now, to answer your question, usually the way lawmaking works is that, the houses of parliament or the branches of parliament, so the House and then the Senate will usually bring forth amendments, and then the two parties, the majority, which is the government, and then the minority, which is the opposition, both bring amendments to the table. Sometimes the amendments are similar with a few variations. Like my brother said, they usually reflect the position of those that are, putting forward the bill. But now what happens is, because of numbers, and like he said, when you don't show up, you're giving the other side more numbers. You're giving the majority a super majority in essence. The majority did factor in, so they did put a clause that says now you can make an application to the board that will be managing the fund, get a mortgage on condition, two things, that one, you agree that the property itself, the land on which the affordable unit will be built, will be used as collateral, and then number two, your savings will also be used as collateral. So usually, both sides have amendments, and then one carries the day. And because those legal imperatives to be met in this case, and because of the nature of the discussions that have gone on, most of the amendments on both sides were largely similar, but with the nuances like the one you've spoken about. So I think what matters is that for an amendment to carry the day, the members need to first, like my brother said, things like communication, publicization, engaging and negotiating and all these other things that go into lawmaking. People need to take that seriously so that at least they can rally both their colleagues and then the public, and get to a place where they influence others towards their position. So the larger answer to your question is the government side still did put an amendment that factored in some of the issues that you raised. Now, with the issue of 2,500 versus 1.5, the balance of equity, and people are asking, because now it's not just the salaried employees, but anybody who earns an income. How do you determine that? Is 2,500%? What percentage is it based on? People are calculating and finding it comes, to a certain figure, and then they are saying, well, how did they determine that will be the figure? So I think a percentage is a fair process, so that everybody will be able to contribute according to their means. And these are some of the issues. Again, that's why there is debate in Parliament. Debate in Parliament is geared towards people influencing others, proposing their points of view, and then forwarding. Now, there's an unfortunate part of how we are making laws today, because in a truly independent Parliament, members would be able to vote for a good idea, whether it came from the government or the opposition side, like my brother said. But now what happens these days is that all the parties coagulate around one position, and the opposition or the opposite side, whether be it government or opposition, coagulates in the opposite direction. So what happens is that all the MPs on one side or the senators on one side vote the same way, and then the others vote the different way. I look forward to a day in Kenya where each parliamentarian will be so independent as to evaluate and hear the debate from the other side. If something makes sense, they can vote for that particular amendment on the basis of what my brother said. It works for Kenyans, it's good for the young people, it's good for employment, it's good for the economy, politics aside. So right now, again, politics is really overbearing this process, and you find that what you've described is one of the collateral damages of over-politicizing the process.
Right. Altulala, does it mean what the courts had, put up as a red flag on that particular housing levy now become null and void? Or do we look at a situation where perhaps the legal aspects or the technicalities of it, or at least some of the policies that have been put up on this bill will come back to bite, not now, but perhaps later on?
Okay, from where I sit, and as I said earlier, my brother has made it very clear that what was lacking in this thing and what was actually highlighted by the courts was the legal aspects. And in this country, we have three arms of government. We have the executive, we have the judiciary, and we have the legislature.
Yeah.
Now, the judiciary pointed out the issues that they felt were lacking in the bill. The judiciary,
the
executive,
the legislature.
Then the legislature. Yeah. Now, the legislature has come up with a bill, the amendments. Now, in their own wisdom, because we as Kenyans believe that anyone who has been elected has been given the mandate by the people to go and represent him. So whenever they do anything, we believe they have done it in their wisdom. So in the wisdom of both houses, they made all the amendments that they felt that were needed. And as per the nature of the houses, decisions are made based on numbers. So the legislators from both houses brought the amendments. The amendments were discussed, and they came to a conclusion, and they voted. So whatever had been wished by both sides, because I'm sure there are even proposals that were being proposed by the government side, which were not all captured 100%, same to what the opposition was wishing. So that remains a wish. And now, procedurally, if anyone would want to reintroduce those later on, then perhaps the lawyers in the room will advise us on the procedure. But as it is, whatever has been passed in Parliament, in both houses, is what is being signed into law today.
Now, Kinuthia, here we are, and the government's commitment was to construct 200,000 units in a year, and that means about 600,000 or 1 million jobs will be created. Is that possible to construct 200,000 in one financial year? Is that possible?
Okay. Before I answer that question, I would like to lay as a foundation what my brother has said, that in each branch of government has their unique role. So the executive, like he said, are the leaders who are elected by the people, and which means when they act, they are perceived to act on behalf of the people, which means they are the government of the day. The legislature is supposed to enact laws, and then the judiciary is supposed to play the role of an independent adjudicator to any issues that come along. There's a principle that says that the judiciary should not legislate from the bench. So that's why they take issues that they say a legal framework is needed. What that means is Parliament needs to enact an act and then pass it into law through the regular process. Secondly, the legislature is meant, and the judiciary are meant to be checks and balances, so that there are no excesses on the part of the executive. So the process as it has played out, to a large extent, is how this is meant to work. Now, to answer your specific question, it remains to be seen. There are too many factors that come into play. In terms of jobs, I have had numbers thrown around that it will be creating. So far, the president did say yesterday that it has created 130,000 jobs for the youth, and he said he envisions creating about 300,000 jobs for the youth. And then the second point is what you've raised, that between 600,000 and 1 million jobs total, whether youth or not non-youth. And then the third angle is the number of units. there are too many factors. There's the issue of funding, there's the issue of budgetary constraints, there's the issue of the actual practicality of finding land, and then once you find land, you have to determine who is the owner of that land. There are processes where if a private citizen or an entity owns the land, there has to be, processes where you adjudicate what's the fair value of that land, and then the government's supposed to compensate that person based on that market value. Technically, there are usually challenges. Somebody may object and say, why are you passing through? There's unused land here. There's a wilderness next to me. Why are you passing through and want to, interfere with my private land? So people go to court and challenge. There's a National Land Commission and the framework that was, and then there's the Ministry of Land. There are so many processes. So then there's the actual operational, construction, the issuing out of tenders and other contracts to do this work. There's the operational aspect of building these houses. There's all kinds of, the Ministry of Works and others do inspections and making sure they're up to standard. And then there's a whole process. There's the idea of the mortgages. There's the idea of, now engaging the owners of these units, and then there's a shifting. Remember, it's always good to revisit history so you know where this is coming from. The idea was to remove people from informal settlements or other, sort of ways that the housing sector is today, and move them, transition them from those informal settlements to the affordable housing. That's the affordable part of it.
Yeah.
The other aspect was moving people from renting houses to owning houses, and the thinking is roughly the same amount or plus or minus that you pay for rent, you can be paying towards owning your own house. So there's the affordable part, and then there's the housing part where somebody becomes a homeowner. Now, it should not be assumed that all those things will work like clockwork, with the magic and everybody being happy and celebrating together and the whole thing works. There'll be challenges for sure. So the realistic and pragmatic answer to your question, if somebody is prudent to think about how these things work, is that it's not a given. Like my brother said, the government has a lot on its hand in terms of government machinery, communication, execution, government departments that are involved in this. Many ministries will be involved. So the saying usually goes, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. I would plan for the worst.
Okay.
Yes.
Alutalala, looking at all, he's tried to explain what really involves constructing even just one house, and you need to find land, you need to find funding, and we're talking about 200,000 units in one fiscal year. Is that viable?
Okay, I think my brother has given a very detailed explanation of actually what will be required to happen for us to realize those units. Now, okay, from where I sit, I don't believe in impossibilities. But practically speaking, unless the bureaucracies within government change overnight, I'm not sure we can attain those numbers. Because let's just take an example. My brother talked of acquiring land, like as in if it is a private land where you have to bring in the issue of National Land Commission, valuations and all that.
Yeah.
Now let me talk on the other side of where the project is being put up in government land. For example, there are these proposed areas along this Jogoo Road, for example. The Ziwanis, the Bahati, those areas of Jogoo Road. Now, you will realize that these areas are not vacant. These are areas that already have houses where people live.
Yeah.
And we are not talking of 10 people. We are talking of thousands of people. So for you to evacuate these people from these lands, there must be a process. Because you cannot just wake up and tell people today, we are breaking these houses. You must give them an alternative. Where are they going? Number two, how are they going? Because when you tell me today that by tomorrow you should not be here, you know there is a cost attached to moving.
Yeah.
And actually moving in Nairobi is very expensive, for example. So there is that whole process of, now we have identified Bahati Estate as one of our affordable housing areas. We have this number of people living in Bahati. How are they going to be moved?
Yeah.
To where? Now, assuming they have been moved, now we start now the process. There is the government tendering procedures that takes months at the earliest. There are cases whereby government projects take years to procure. So for me, I think the president's agenda is a bit ambitious, which is good. It is always good to be ambitious in life. But practically speaking, attaining those numbers, I know we are a prayer country. We do pray a lot. Those numbers, attaining them may need a lot of prayers from the way I know how government operates.
Yeah.
But it is good to be ambitious. Yeah.
All right, so I'd love us to halt it at that point on the affordable housing bill, and perhaps now switch to something else. But as I mentioned earlier, President William Ruto is expected to assent it into law this morning in State House. So that means perhaps by 9 a.m. He will be doing that at State House, where other members of the executive as well as members from the legislature will be there to just oversee that process. Now let's talk about the budget policy statement, which basically provides a framework for the budget of the financial year 2024-2025. And this is a conversation as well that has been out in the public as that policy statement came out, that seeks to really anchor the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. It focuses on agriculture, the MSMEs, the micro, small, medium enterprises, focuses on the digital economy, on housing, and on healthcare. And if I look at some of the numbers, we are looking at a budget deficit of about 705 billion shillings. This means we'll have to find ways to fund 705 billion shillings. The national government will gobble up 2.5 billion shillings from the current 2.4 billion. The executive takes the highest chunk of money at 2.4 billion shillings, as well as the parliament that, pardon me, not billion, but trillion shillings. Then the parliament will come in with about 41 billion shillings, as well as the judiciary at 23 billion. Now, ladies and, pardon me, gentlemen, we've had an issue with the judiciary that has really been, talking about less funding. But interestingly, they've been, have an increase from 22 billion shillings to 23 billion in this particular fiscal year. We saw previously the conversations between the executive and the judiciary following that, verbal tussle. Was this to be expected?
So, one, when a new government takes place, and especially in the first term, the budget is supposed to reflect their priorities. The president made a subtle comment yesterday when he was talking about the affordable housing project that or act and fund that we've just been talking about. He said the first year was very difficult, so they couldn't get this done. So the first point I would like to say is that generally, as a rule of thumb in government, budgets are driven by expenditure from last year, what people have used up. That's why you see towards the end of the financial year, state corporations and ministries are rushing to gobble up their sections of funding, so that they don't lose it. The second thing you observe about budgets per se is that that's how the government, one, is able to implement its policies and agenda. Number two, that's how it exercises its influence and authority. And number three, that's how they get their priorities and initiatives passed through. So you mentioned the tussle between the government and the judiciary. By design, the judiciary is supposed to, and the legislature are supposed to be, we are a tricameral system of government with the three arms of government, but the executive is in charge. The judiciary, like I said earlier, makes the laws, and usually is where the government policies pass by before they're enacted into law. There's debate, and there's all sides kinds of discussions and negotiations, and then voting happens, and then parliament enacts laws, modifies laws, or removes laws. And then the judiciary has their role as the referee. They have a role as the adjudicator. They represent equity for any parties that feel aggrieved. Now, each of those branches are supposed to be independent so that one cannot exact or over-influence the other, especially where the goal is political or it's just a power game. So, for example, the judiciary is supposed to have a budget. Any independent constitutional office is supposed to have a budget. But now, because they're in leadership and it's the role of government, they do enact the budgets for these departments. So what I would say is that there's been a lot of back and forth and interaction between the executive and the judiciary. I believe they have come to an understanding. Like you noted, there is an increase in funding, and there are a lot of things. So personally, I believe this is healthy for our system of government, for our country, for the political as well as economic as well as the social transformation that the government should be doing. And what I think needs to happen more is more consultations, more collaboration. Like my brother earlier noted, that's really key. Everybody should be working for the best interest of the citizen of Kenya. So sometimes these are power games, sometimes it's the way the process works, sometimes it's a balance of power, which is what the tricameral system aims to achieve, and sometimes it's just where we are in the growth curve or the learning curve of how a tricameral, that's why some countries have been doing this longer. They're more mature in that kind of process. So personally, I see it as a healthy part of the three arms of government getting to know their functions and exercising that functions. And where there's conflict, where there's disagreement, where people are on different sides, some polarization, they find a way to come together, negotiate, agree, and move forward in serving the best interests of Kenyans.
Right. Although this budget is anchored on key sectors like agriculture, like MSMEs, like the housing, healthcare, and digital economy, perhaps to reflect that what the government believes, if they're able to properly facilitate these sectors, then they'll be able to, cushion Kenyans from the high cost of living. Do you see it the same from the way you sit?
First of all, before we come to whether the budget will bring the cost of living down, I think as a country, it has reached a time whereby we citizens need to talk to our leadership. Reason being, looking at this budget, I find myself in a situation whereby I feel there are two very critical sectors or sections of government that are actually underfunded every year, and reasons are not very clear to me. There is this office of the Auditor General. From the days of Mr. Edward Ouko, he has always complained of understaffing. He has complained of lack of sufficient officers countrywide to do his work properly. And as you know, this country, despite all the good things we are doing, there is one serious problem of corruption. Now, we have heard this statement in the past whereby it was being said that what is happening in this country is what we call budgeted corruption. That corruption starts from the budgeting stage, whereby a budget is made with corruption already in it, whereby money is allocated in a way that is very clear in the minds of the drafters that by the time this project or this budget is being implemented, we have an extra this number of this amount of money. So I'm yet to know why the Office of the Auditor General is not sufficiently funded so that it can perform its audit work properly. Because if you look today, the audit reports that are being discussed in Parliament are for the year, I think it's 2020, 2021. If they are, I'm not even sure if they have reached 2020. But in the past, we have been having audit reports that were done 5 years ago. So this is an audit report discussing projects that were done either in the previous government. Even the office holders have left office. They cannot be brought, okay, you can be brought to account even when you're out of office. But the question is, why should audit reports not be up to date? It is because of the issue of staffing. Now, just the other day, I watched the CEO to ESCC saying that Kenya has 55 million people. For ESCC to be everywhere, they will need 55 million ESCC officials, even though it was on a light note. But what he was saying is that ESCC is not sufficiently funded to be up to date with dealing with corruption. Now, let's come to the issue of the judiciary. Just this Friday, I read somewhere in the papers, the ODPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, saying North Rift alone has 7,000 cases pending. It was in the Daily Nation. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that we don't have enough courts and we don't have enough judges. So when you tell me that from the previous year to this budget, the judiciary budget has only been adjusted by 1 billion. To me, that is still not enough. Because our major problem in this country is not that Kenya is a poor country. Kenya is very rich. We have enough money to run our affairs. Our biggest problem is corruption. So if we are to use the money that we have prudently, then we must empower the Office of the Auditor General to have enough staff and enough officers countrywide so that it can be up to date with audit of government projects. Number two, we need to have enough funding for the judiciary. Because even as you talk about bringing the cost of living down, how will you bring the cost of living down when the money that is meant for projects is being looted left, right, and center? How will you bring the cost of living down when every money that comes in, every project is being tripled in terms of cost? You saw what came out of the SGR compensation. We were told that the SGR that we build in Kenya, the cost that was used here, a similar cost was used in Ethiopia, and they actually have an electric line. It's like we used 3 times what Ethiopia used to do an electric line. So the problem in this country is corruption. So unless we empower the Office of the Auditor General so that he's up to date with his audits, we don't want these cases whereby I was a minister in the former government, the audit reports in my ministry are coming 7 years later when I left office. These things should be done when I'm still in office, so that if the audits prove that last year, we are now talking of 2024, if it is proved that in 2023, in your ministry, while you are serving, money was misused, action has to be taken there and then while you are still in office. So for me, this budget, the government agenda is clear and it is good, and we support it, but we need more funding for those arms of government that are dealing with transparency and accountability in government, because that is one thing that this government is very silent on. We are not speaking about these things, and yet we know very well that every day we are seeing in the news, this state corporation, this amount of money has been lost. In this state corporation, this amount of money has been lost. You saw what happened the other day with fuel. When you are talking about government-to-government deal, that G2G deal. For a long time, we never saw the effect of that G2G deal, meaning either there is some money that might have been lost somewhere, or it was just a deal that never came to be. So for me, this budget statement is good, But I think we needed more emphasis on how we are going to deal with public wastage. You remember the other day when we had this tree planting day, these social media posts that was showing a cabinet secretary flying in a chopper to Homa Bay to plant one tree and fly to Malindi to plant another tree. You can imagine the cost that was used to plant 2 trees by a cabinet secretary. This is the type of wastage that we are talking about. So it is not just about reading the budget. It is about how are we going to utilize these funds that are going to come in. Because now, you see now, like the paper says, KRN news tightens on hustlers. What that means is everybody is supposed to pay taxes. Personally, I have no problem paying taxes because what I know, even this money that we get from other countries in terms of aid and loans, those are taxes paid by the citizens of those countries that they are loaning to us. So I have no problem paying taxes as a Kenyan. But the question is, how is this tax being used? How accountable are our leaders when it comes to the use of these taxes? That is the big question.
Right.
Yeah.
Kinuthia, we're almost out of time. We've got a few minutes to wrap it up. However, I want to get your thought on that because you've really been nodding in agreement. But in addition, also speak on the fiscal deficit because we're having a budget deficit of 705 billion shillings. And we seem to be stuck in this cycle of, borrowing and repaying the debt and borrowing again to fund the budget and repaying it. We seem to be stuck in this cycle of debt and borrowing and repayment. Yeah.
So we have a challenge because one, we've been borrowing too much. We borrowed so much that we even turned to local borrowing from local lenders, commercial lenders. Like my brother has observed, there is too much wastage. There is no prudence in in fiscal matters, and then there's the big elephant of corruption. And I think the onus is, like my brother, he put the accountability in the right place. It's on the citizen of Kenya. The citizen of Kenya has become too detached from what their politicians are doing. We are a representative democracy, which means that person in parliament is supposed to be representing the members of the constituency that sent him there. And we've changed it to where, unfortunately, people need a lot of money to bribe their citizens, who are supposed to be the board of directors that appoint the executive, and then now spend all their career as politicians amassing, first getting back that money that they spent to bribe the citizens, and then after that amassing their own load of money, preparing a kitty for the next election. These people are not taking this matter seriously. So to answer your question, we are paying too much in terms of interest. There's too much wastage. My brother observed the procurement process is flawed because we don't have a proper the proper checks and balances. If it costs X to implement one policy or one project, there's always 2X, 3X. It's multiplied over and over because everybody wants a cut. People are asking for kickbacks. Unfortunately, government officials in power ask for that kickback. It's become, a kitty for everybody to make, to make money. So, as a country, we need to be a bit more serious because these deficits speak to the inability to be able to do that. Now, there's of course the other side of the coin, which says my brother talked of taxation. It's important because the tax system as it has been today, only the formally employed, the salaried workers, the importers and exporters, and the large corporations have largely participated in that sector. Now, we are seeing the government trying to amend that by bringing in the micro, the small, the medium businesses. But how it's being done is not the most efficient and the most effective because the requisite engagement with the public. You had farmers and other small traders and border people and the so-called hustlers complaining. We don't even know what this e-teams thing, but suddenly our suppliers are denying us. We are not able to do transactions because we are not registered on e-teams and we are not competent both in the system and even in the technology, the computer-based way that it's supposed to be executed. So the government needs to approach it in a more friendly way, a more educative way, with more public participation. They need to remind the citizen that you have a role in paying taxes, but they also need to play their role. We seem to always be working from the answer. We gain a lot of debt, and then now we are paying debt backwards, and the budget reflects that. There's corruption, that's also reflected. There's this other issue of the taxation regime not being very representative and being too complex, and not being done the right way. So there's homework for everybody. There's homework for the citizen, there's homework for the government, there's homework for the legislature, and also the corporations, the state corporations and other agencies and entities that are responsible for that. It's not a good thing to have a budget deficit. It means that we are living above our means.
Right, living above our means. Halutalala, perhaps final words as we wrap it up in 30 seconds.
From what my friend has just said in his closing remarks is that as Kenyans, we have a role to play in this. We need to know that when we elect leaders, we are giving them, we are delegating our powers to them to represent us. So we need to know what these leaders are doing on our behalf. Kenyans have reached a place whereby it's like we have given up all our powers. We don't care what the MPs are doing. We don't care what the leadership is doing. Yet this money that is paying them is our taxes. Looking at that budget statement, you are talking of 41 billion for parliament.
Yeah.
That is our money. So there is no way you can give someone 41 billion, then you don't care what he does with it. So it is high time we start asking our people questions. And there is this very important thing in our constitution about public participation. From where I sit, I think we have a gap somewhere. The way government communicates, even the way government does this public participation at the grassroots, leaves a lot to be desired. Because you will realize, for example, a notice is put in the papers, there will be public participation somewhere. Then, when you do, for example, when you put a notice in the dailies, that there will be a public participation in Baringo, somewhere in Baringo, or somewhere in those sides of Western, those deeper areas. How many Kenyans do you expect to read? That means, even though the law requires you to put in a media outlet of nationwide circulation, it is also important to realize the people you are working for. These are people who are not all accessing this information through print media. Yeah. So people need to be mobilized with the aim of getting real feedback. But if you see the way these things are done, they are normally done just a procedure. And I have attended some whereby you go there are no even copies of what is being discussed, number one. So you are just being taken through a document being read by someone like a Bible in church. You see, you cannot give any meaningful feedback in such a forum. Yeah. So we need more public sensitization on government projects and government spending. Yes. This will help a lot even in terms of creating awareness among the citizenry, and it will help the citizenry give real feedback that will help the country going forward.
All right, Kinuthia, in 30 seconds.
My brother has made an important point about the role of a citizen. Yeah. Public participation now is being used to rubber stamp, not to have the citizen exercise their mandate, which is, again, the checks and balances to those they elected in power. There are processes that are not being used or that are being abused. So I would say, unfortunately, as a country, we need to now mature both the way we do leadership, the way we do politics, the way we do economics, and we need to take this seriously. The citizens need to realize, I'm glad that in this particular term of government, people are really recognizing the direct relationship between the pocket and the decisions they made in terms of electing any level of leader, from your MCA to your MP to your senator to your governor to the presidency and the entire structure of government. So I believe the call is on the citizens to become serious. and then to hold their leaders accountable. The way leadership works, especially in politics, the moment the politicians realize the citizens are serious and will not take this nonsense and a lot of games that are being played, they will change and adapt to what the citizen wants. Today, like my brother has observed, the citizen has taken a backseat approach, and a lot of things are going wrong, and they want to point the leaders, their fingers at the leaders and keep saying, we have bad leaders, they are this and that. The leaders are a reflection of the people that elected them, and the role they are playing in holding them accountable.
All right. Thank you very much to both of you. Alutalala Wycliffe for coming in. Earlier I said, Mokwan, I was wondering, am I baptizing you with a name from my region? Apologies about that. So Alutalala Wycliffe, a political analyst and commentator, as well as John Kinuthia, who's a leadership and governance expert. Thank you for both of you for coming in to shed more light on this. So we'll be keeping tabs with various stories across the day, particularly on the bill, which should be sent any minute from now at State House by President William Ruto. And then, of course, the budget conversation continues. The budget policy statement is out, and that means we'll be expecting way later, in a couple of weeks, the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary will be reading it at the floor of the National Assembly. So that has been the conversation this morning. Thank you very much for watching. In case you've missed it, you can rewatch it across our social media platforms. I'm Cynthia Nanjala. Have yourselves a wonderful morning.
Thank you.